The Battle of the Somme, July the 1st, 1916. It was a hot summer's day of the offensive. 100,000 British soldiers were lined up, most of them from Kitchener's army, infused with the most patriotic slogan, "For King and for Country." But by thus, more than half of them were either killed or wounded in a 12-hour slaughter, and the most dreaded defeat in British history, as these brave soldiers literally walked to their death. The offensive that gained nothing. So Belgium was at the verge of defeat, and the combined efforts of the British and French had halted the German attack. But the Germans had started an offensive at the fortress city of Verdun on February the 15th. Artillery shells rained down on the French, and the offensive was to overrun the defenders of France and put them on the breaking point. As the French were on their breaking point, as the Germans knew it would be, the French were desperate and asked the British, well, not desperate, but asked the British for help. The planned British offensive that would relieve the pressure of Verdun, or else the French would be obligated to surrender, and the war would be lost. The men would march to the front, where they knew and experienced soldiers that were part of Kitchener's army, in nickname for the Minister of War, Lord Kitchener. The men of entire cities and towns joined up together, as they were called PAL or Chum battalions. The opening of the Somme was fought in the middle of the year, in the middle of the war. Stalemate ensured the powers dug themselves into trenches stretching from Switzerland to the north of France. The normal British trench was 6 to 8 feet deep and 6 to 7 feet wide, as sandbag walls provided shielding from explosive shrapnel shells and bullets from snipers or machine gunners. The British High Command argued against the comfortable living trench system, which made trench life and walking up and down the trench even a rough and tiring task. The British trench system never was built in a straight line, protecting the men from being wiped out from one shell or flamethrower or even machine gun fire. A bit above the trench lines were a sap nervous sentry positions to pick up enemy voices and activity. Behind the front line, there were reserve men from the main front line. No man's land. The size of no man's land varied depending on the surface of the ground, and it could be miles apart or literally a few yards apart. Barbed wire was key to trench defense. The trench life was rough, from complete boredom to trying to duck and cover for your life. That made even the most full-hearted soldiers break down and lose a bit of their soul inside. Artillery was a dominant force in breaking through trench defenses and getting through enemy lines. It was key. It was also a psychological weapon that was basically insta-death or even severe injury, which would even lead to death. And the terrors, that the noise and the fact that you never knew when or where a shell would land when artillery started, caused physical trauma, which is now similar, probably even related to post-traumatic stress disorder for a modern soldier. Robert Hay had planned the summer offensive to be a turning point of the war, but the German offensive at Verdun, the plan had to turn into a threefold plan. 1. Relieve the French at Verdun. 2. Take down the German army a peg, and the influence, the grip that they had on that trench line, and finally put the British in a strategic position for the hoping of a final blow in 1917 that surely never came. He was off by 1 year. By the time the British got to the Somme, a massive build-up of British troops that made the Germans think to be aware of an offensive, as they realized the massive amount of British troops moving into the area as they started to dig and started to go down in their 40-feet bunkers in their trench systems. The Germans had a very high vantage point, giving them a good overview of the whole valley and trench system. So they knew when and where the British would march up from because they have the higher ground, so they were strategically better than any army. The 4th Army was led by General Rawlinson. The 4th Army was to take the German position at the southern point of the River Yeg. The optimistic Hay brought up 3 new cavalry divisions commanded by Sir General Robert Gough. They were to exploit any gaps left in the German lines, but General Allenby knew that would leave his men exposed from 3 that he knew that the plan could not succeed, or even the division. They would be exposed from 3 gaps that the Germans could exploit. He knew it could not succeed as it was a division, and getting their objectives would be very hard and made no sense. He wanted to bombard the German trenches for 5 days and 5 nights and let the cavalry and infantry mop up. And also the bombardment was to destroy the long barbed wire defences of the German outposts. The infantry would move up, followed by the cavalry to pursue the retreating German enemy. On July the 1st, before July the 1st, sappers built tunnels on the German lines to plant mines, and the General HQ had to prepare for a large amount of losses, getting hospital trains and improvised hospital trains to carry the wounded or dead away from the battlefield. The plans and preparations were the biggest in British Army history, and from June 24th, the British bombarded the German trenches. The night before the attack, the scout patrol of the British soldiers were to report out and see the damage caused by the bombarding shelling, as they came back to report that ominously the barbed wire was just there, sitting, not even touched. But the generals thought it was just men scared and nervous jitters for the first time going over the top tomorrow, as they did not believe them. On the morning of June the 1st, the first attack of the British went over the top and walked slowly to the enemy trenches to assault them. The Germans had the time and came up from their dugouts and prepared the machine guns and rifles, as it was a race against time that the British did not win, as the Germans were the victors, as thousands of British troops literally walked into machine gun fire, as they had easy targets. So easy that one German machine gunner literally stopped at the horror that was happening in mere minutes. In no man's land was filled with dead bodies. Thousands of battalions were mowed down. Those who lived through the German machine guns and artillery from God knows where faced another deadly foe, the barbed wire, as they were supposed to be cut down to shreds. They were completely untouched. Some tried to cross them Some were even so boiled up and coiled up into balls that it was even harder for the soldiers to get across. But as they tried to cross them, machine gun fire had easier targets as they could not go anywhere, as bodies literally littered the barbed wire. During the first hours, there were many acts of courage and bravery. Still 1 mile from the front lines, the Irish troops advanced the main British line as they walked down the main hill, as they were out in the open, leaving easy pickings. The Tide Striders, that was the name of the battalion, barely reached the front lines, as 50 men barely made it over no man's land. The only praise that most battalions and troops got was that they actually made it further than most men. The Mudebar division was the only army division that actually complete its task for the morning. Propaganda was news as they caught German POWs as the success of the 44th Army to the south was supposed to link up with the 56th Army to the north, making their fruits useless no matter how much prisoners they caught. In just 4 hours, 50,000 British soldiers were either killed or wounded. With such little gain for these losses, despite the courage, all have gotten but a few yards and barely some shaken up prisoners from the German line. No man's land was littered and laid with dead bodies, some men even digging little potholes to try and escape and survive as they lived in those dugouts until the night came. The British yet again tried another counterattack 7 hours later, as they went over one single machine gun, raped a whole line as they were called back after only yards away. In 3 minutes, more than 103 men were either dead or wounded. The British big push was a chaotic disaster. More than 50 of the men were killed, and the field officers or field generals had a higher mortality rate of 75%. The small prisoners were to numb the fact that every yard was a British prisoner, dying, dead, or wounded on the ground. Out of 18 miles of supposed ground they had to gain. The battle actually lasted for 4 months. But the Somme wasn't all bad, as new tactics such as creeping fire, tanks, better and more observant reconnaissance, and more better ways and better tactics, and even the Americans coming to join the war in 1917 gave the British Army the optimism of actually finishing the war. But the Somme would always go down in history as the worst battle in human British World War I. Anything you look at it, it was the most blood-soaked bath in the history of the world. The haunting image would forever be in the soldiers that fought on the front line of the Somme, as it remained in their poetry, their memoirs, biographies, books, movies, and even their last words to their loved ones before they died.
can bring time to make me forget